Hi, everybody, and welcome to our virtual event celebrating Braden Cawthon's SIRENS. We have two really interesting folks here to chat with us today. First, I'm going to introduce our conversation partner, Michael Petranek. Michael is the Editorial Director of the Graphix Media and AFK away from keyboard imprints at Scholastic. A Publishers Weekly Starwatch Nominee, he leads strategy and editorial for multiple brands, including Marvel, Five Nights at Freddy's, Jim Benton's Catwad, Kaepernick Publishing, and more. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife, their two sons, and their very lazy cat, and has a deep love of video games, comic books, baseball, and the guitar. And then our author for this evening, celebrating the debut novel, Sirens, we have Braden Cawthon, an author and computer scientist from Texas. When he's not writing or working on his PC, he spends his time enjoying an assortment of different video games and also playing with his cat. And I have to say, I'm obsessed with both of you, including your cats in your bios, because that's a perfect way to live. But today we're here to discuss Braden's debut YA thriller, Sirens. And it should be noted that while he enjoys writing thrillers, his favorite genre is fantasy.
It is.
At least that's what he told us. And so I'm just going to do a quick rundown of how this event works, and then I'm going to leave them to it. So first things to note, as our viewers, you had access to the rules and regulations for using Crowdcast. Obviously, we're not going to let anyone harass our authors or speakers, do anything. You can't take the chat over to get your point across. But you absolutely can talk about how excited you are, how much you're loving the conversation, how you're so excited to look into their work and things like that. And if you have questions, there will be a question and answer section. There's also on the scroll page, icon menu, there's a little Q&A, and if you press there, you'll be able to ask a question so that when we get to the Q&A section of the event, one of the Mysterious Galaxy staff, or me, Michelle, we will be able to send the question up to the speakers so they can answer while we have it up on the screen for everybody else. I don't think there's anything else I need to say. Someone maybe will let me know if there was. But if not, and because I feel like it, I'm going to remove myself and let these two get on to talking, and I will be back in at the end of the show. So thank you so much. And, a round of applause for Michael and Braden.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
It won't
I don't know. You're stuck with us here.
I'm trying to leave you to be perfect and do this.
We'll direct the questions to you now. You just make up the answers however you want.
Oh, there she But that was an awesome intro to both of us. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I get to do a little bit of everything at Scholastic, and we're so excited to have Sirens on our list. Just came out last Tuesday. People are really loving it. Great to see Braden. He and I haven't been on camera together in a little while, but we got to talk a lot while this book was being made. So yeah, I think, like I said, she did that was a fantastic introduction to both of us. I think what we're going to do is, we're going to talk a little bit about the book, about writing, about everything goes into this kind of book, how you came to write it and how we came to make it. And I'm going to kind of let you, just take it away. Like, if you want to tell us just the main plot of Sirens, how it got, what the story is, and we'll kind of start there.
For sure. So Sirens begins whenever Joel Walker, the protagonist of our story, wakes up with his mom and his sister missing in the wake of a massive power outage and a catastrophic event that he's unaware of at the moment. And every night whenever the sun goes down, an otherworldly siren begins to blare, and as they discover, it changes those who listens to it in ways that aren't super pleasant. And so along with the help of a fellow survivor she meets, Emily, the duo journeys through the city, searching for their answers and their lost loved ones before they might succumb to whatever madness is creeping into their minds. It's a lovely book, really.
Thank you.
Very feel-good,
Yeah, just a feel-good post-apocalyptic story.
Absolutely, about losing loved ones and all that. It's great.
Well, one of the things that struck me when I first read it was how it just starts off with a bang. That's that's one of my favorite things about the book, about the story. As you mentioned, Joel wakes up and immediately there are huge problems. His
Yeah.
mom, his sister are missing. It reminds me of a lot of great horror movies where that happens, where something happens right away, like maybe 28 Days Later or something like that.
Oh,
Yeah. So I'd love to hear like more. We talked about this a little bit, but kind of how you got the idea for the story, because I know the way you wrote it. Well, you can tell better than I can, but the way you wrote it is it's a little out of the ordinary, which I thought was really cool.
It's a little atypical. It was very atypical. I was
Yeah.
rolling the ideas around for the story in my head for a while, but other than the fundamental idea of the titular sirens, which we can get into later, the core idea and the very first scene that I even thought of for this book was the very last scene in the book. Like literally the last 2 pages of the book are the first thing that I knew that I was going to write. Before I even knew what the character's name was, I knew exactly what was going to happen with his story and exactly where the book was going to end. And so everything after that, every step along the way was purpose built to get the book to that moment that I wanted to write. And so in that sense, I guess I would describe myself more as a pantser than a planner for writing this book,
Right.
in that I knew where I was starting, I knew where I was ending, and I just figured it out as I went.
Hmm.
And I mean, you mentioned
Yeah.
opening the book with a bang, and that was really just it was taking the idea of the hook as best as I
Yeah.
could, where it's like, if I know where I want the book to end, why beat around the bush? Just like get into the book immediately and start the story right where things start going south.
Yeah, I love that because I'm the kind of person that, like, if I'm watching a movie or something, I'd love to be jolted out of my seat the minute it starts. Not to say that there's something to a slow build, but there is something about getting a kick in the butt right away that is very intriguing to me, and that's something I really loved about it. But yeah, I can't. I've never haven't talked to too many people that start with the ending. I thought that was really cool because, well, we're not going to. I know that a lot of people are really interested in the book and maybe haven't read it yet, so we're going to try to keep this as spoiler free as possible. Braden and I were
Yeah.
talking like before here, but there are a lot of pretty wild twists that get you to that ending. We'll talk about that more, but as we go on. But I think another thing I wanted to talk about was the word sirens, because obviously it has a few other meanings. We can talk
Yeah.
about sirens that, like a police siren, but there's also, of course, the historical idea of sirens. I might get this wrong, Brady. You know better than I. I think it's a Greek mythological being that makes sailors go crazy. You can talk about it a little
Yeah,
more.
so
About that title.
so about like the
Sure.
title and sirens in general, and this is sort of the core titular sirens idea that I had mentioned before, is that for as simple as it is, I'm really proud of that title and that idea because at its heart, it's kind of a pun. I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of a pun. In that the wordplay of it being sirens, have a visitor. The wordplay of
Yeah.
it being sirens is both that the main threat of the book that it seems is literally like sirens, like loud tornado sirens, but then also it alluding to sirens, the Greek myth sirens that you mentioned, and having elements of that show up within the story. It seemed like such a simple cohesion of these two ideas of the same name that, along with that ending scene that I mentioned building the book from, that wordplay is kind of the like I knew that the book was called Sirens before I started writing it. That was the working title that I used. It stayed the same throughout the entire book. It just seemed to work so well for me.
That is so interesting. Yeah, and it took me a second there. I was like, Greek, because I remember reading the Odyssey as a high schooler.
Yeah.
The sirens of the Odyssey are where I think that trope originates from. One of my other favorite uses of it is "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which is kind of an adaptation of the Odyssey and the sirens in that. So that was another thing about the book that sort of struck me the first time I read it. And I actually kind of want to talk a little bit about how we came to be working together because, as you heard from my introduction, I'm mainly a licensed editor. I do original series at Scholastic, but I generally am editing licensed graphic novels and novels, meaning that we have a deal with the licensor, whether that be Marvel Comics, for example, and make things based on it. But I do get submissions occasionally. So this submission came to me. Like I said, I've gotten to do some cool original stuff at Scholastic, but this originally came to me as an adult novel, and I said, I love this, and I'm going to give you the notes to make it YA if you want. Not trying to lead you that way, but obviously, selfishly, I was like, I hope he makes it into a YA novel so we can publish it. But yeah, I mean, so you want to talk a little bit about that, like how you kind of originally started out as Joel being an older character, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So the very first draft of this book was 3 years ago and some change ago. It was a long time ago that I
Right.
very first started writing this. And the original interpretation of this story, he was much older. He was a father. He was divorced. The dynamics with him. So in the current iteration of the novel, he's a brother looking for his mother and sister, and those dynamics change as well as his dynamics with a few of the other characters. In the original interpretation, he was a father who is primarily going after his daughter, and along with those family dynamic changes and also the relationship of a much older, more confident Joel being turned into a teenager who isn't quite as set in the world, changed a lot about the minutia of the novel. But also the change from adult to YA also changed a little bit of the elements that I wanted to put into the adult version of the novel, in that a lot of the more adult, darker elements of the initial vision of the novel probably wouldn't super fit in a YA novel. However, looking forward to the future, if there were to be a sequel to Sirens, which is mostly only exists in my mind right now, something that I would love to lean into is a lot of those darker elements that, for the sake of book one and for getting people into it, was maybe reeled back a little bit on. But a lot of that, a lot more deep psychological stuff is just what I loved about the original idea. And
yeah,
and
we know. Yeah, and kind of going off of that, one thing I loved about the change too was that there's something about him trying to save his little sister that it's just such a different thing than trying to save your daughter, right? Like, obviously, father-daughter relationship is very different than brother-sister. And I have a sister; she's older, but obviously, I'd go to the ends of the earth for my sister, and there's something very relatable about that.
I mean,
Especially
especially for a young adult audience, I feel like
yeah,
having a brother-sister dynamic like that, and especially whenever in a lot of young adult fiction, a lot of sibling relationships are portrayed as a little bit antagonistic or, banter
right,
or whatever. Having there
yeah,
be a brother-sister relationship like that where it's a lot more of a despite being a writer, I can't find the word for it in this moment. But
well, you thanked your brother in the acknowledgments for
Yeah.
helping you proofread. I thought that was so cool. And I agree. Obviously, I think one of the tropes or the ideas is that brothers and sisters and siblings are at each other's throats all the time. There's some truth to that, but I love seeing a brother and sister portrayed as with a loving relationship, especially at the age of Joel. As a teen himself. It's really cool, because like I said, my sister and I, we're in our 40s now, and we'll still, I'd hop on as a fellow Texan like Braden, I am from Texas originally, I'd hop on a plane in a minute if my sister needed me to.
Absolutely. And
Yeah, right.
especially compared to as much as I hate to say it, since this was the original idea of the novel, the father-daughter dynamic, or the father trying to save a daughter dynamic, is very cliched. Because it's such an effective tool for catharsis. So
Right.
a lot of people can immediately empathize with what that might be like, even if they themselves don't have children. So just having that little bit of a dynamic shift, I feel like helps a lot with the uniqueness of the idea, and also with the relatability of it being a YA novel.
Yeah, I agree. We talked a little bit about other YA novels. I want to talk about inspirations too, like what
Sure.
we were talking before the we were just talking about things we've been reading before the chat opened and everything. But yeah, like what novels have you read that inspired you to become a writer early on? Like what are you reading now? Like I'd love to hear that.
So the novels, so there's two circles here, and they're not in a Venn diagram, and that's novels that I've read now and novels that
Uh
inspired this. The novels that inspired this are actually novels that I do not enjoy reading. It's just that they're novels that thematically I loved, and that's that the primary direct inspiration. I mean, there's a lot of direct inspirations with any creative writing, which I think that any writer would know. Like, a lot of ideas, especially nowadays,
huh.
it's a mix of the 15 different things you really like, and you spit out one new idea where it's like, oh, these are all the things that I really liked about these other 20 things. But the most direct inspiration that I could think of off the top of my head is actually Lovecraft. And that's that, like, I mean,
Sure.
Lovecraft is weird fiction. Like, it's
Yeah.
a really weird niche of cosmic horror, and the writing is atypical to say the least. I'm
Hmm.
not a super huge fan of even reading Lovecraft's books, if I'm being totally honest. But the idea behind them, and the idea behind cosmic horror and sort of, I mean, literally Lovecraftian horror as he coined it, is so interesting to me psychologically, where it's like having a book that's set with an inconceivable, unknowable eldritch force that the characters can't win or fight against. They are just living with, and they're hoping not to suffer from it. And that is such a
Yeah.
potent idea to set a book, where I just knew that I wanted to set a book where that was the main idea, where it's the characters aren't fighting something, the characters are living with something and suffering something. And how does that
Hmm.
change them?
That's
Other
cool.
other inspirations that are a little bit more mundane, where it's like if all the way over here is the psychological side, where it's like, oh, Lovecraft, cosmic horror, it's so fun. All the way over on the other side is that I'm really scared of tornado sirens. They're really scary. They're it's so you combine those two, where it's like, okay, you have tornado sirens on one hand, and you have Lovecraft, and you just do that. Sirens. That's the book.
You know, I can't believe we never talked about tornado sirens because, as I mentioned, I'm also from Texas, and
Mhm.
a lot of the people joining us might not know this, but you grow up in Texas, you're doing tornado drills in school a lot of the time,
Oh,
and
yeah,
it's really
absolutely.
scary, right? So, like my wife was recently there was a storm in Brooklyn, as you might have heard. And my wife was like, "Is there going to be a tornado?" And I was like, "No, no, there's not going to be a tornado. Trust me. If there's a tornado coming, I'll know." It is terrifying. It is terrifying. That is so cool.
Yeah.
So you think in your head that the sirens almost obviously they kind of I'm really trying so hard not to do any spoilers, but they can kind of vary. But like, how did you hear it in your sound in your head? Did you hear it as like a tornado siren?
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
depending on where you're at in the book, it's a loaded question,
Right.
but, in my head, this is a really specific reference that it was a viral video, so some of you watching might know what I'm talking about. There's one
Okay.
specific video of a broken tornado siren in Chicago. Look it up on YouTube. That's the sound I hear. It is the most
Okay.
terrifying tornado siren I've ever heard in my entire life, and if you find it on YouTube, you'll know exactly which one I mean. But it's like this. Just look it up on YouTube at some point. It's terrifying. But that's the sound that I hear. Like, whenever I was imagining any of those scenes at the start of the book, whenever it's all going down the first night and there's just
Hmm.
absolute chaos in the city and everything's going down, that's the sound that's in my head. And it's quite terrifying. I mean, this kind of actually goes
Yeah.
back to the inspirations question. And that's
Sure.
a small part of that, which, again, this being the internet, I'm sure a couple of you might have heard of this, but a smaller inspiration just for the idea of having tornado sirens as sort of an indicator of a threat that's not tornadoes was a creepypasta called Siren Head. Have you heard of Siren Head? It's
That's
it's
cool.
it's a stupid internet creepypasta, just like anything else, where it's just like a creature that's like a big walking telephone pole that makes a siren noise. And, it's like it's little things like that just go to show inspiration can come from the weirdest sources where it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, yeah, it's a little internet story about a walking telephone pole. Let's" it
And
makes
you have a title for the second book, Siren Head. There you go.
Yeah, there we go, It was a monster walking around the whole time, who would have
Yeah.
thought? Or, I mean, even as far as internet sources go, there's even, um this is much more spoilers, so I'm not gonna talk about this much at all, but if you
Okay.
have read it, and you've watched Local 58 on YouTube, there's one pretty direct reference to Local 58 because I love that series on
Right.
YouTube so much. You'll know it if you've read it, but I couldn't resist putting that in there. So
Yeah.
that's a little Easter egg for those of you who both know what Local 58 is and read the book.
Yes, that is definitely. If you know what that is and you read the book, you would definitely catch it. That is very true. Well, yeah, I'm glad that our shared experience growing up in Texas and being terrified of tornado sirens has led us to this point together. Well, actually, but I wanted to kind of, speaking of growing up, like, I want to know when did you start writing? I remember I'm an editor, I'm not a writer, but I remember playing with action figures very early on, and even like making stories with my X-Men and Batman action figures, and I'd love to hear about that.
That's a really interesting question. It also has a lot of answers depending on what exactly you mean by writing. Because I mean, like, obviously everyone does writing in school for projects or
Right.
but as far as like actual creative writing goes,
Yes.
I remember a long time ago, I tried writing a book in, like,
Mhm.
4th grade. I mean, I was so small, and I wish I had like a PDF of that thing because, like, each chapter
Yeah.
150 words long, and it was a mess. And then I tried again a few years later after that was equally as poor quality. But I remember that there was a point. It's such a distinct memory in my mind now, having published something, and it was in like 10th or 11th grade, and there was a creative writing assignment that we had somewhere
Mhm.
where, I mean, it was just whatever you can imagine of creative writing assignment. It's like, oh, pick a prompt, do whatever with it and see how creative you can get with it and write a little short story with this. And for some reason, I was just so compelled to go so overboard on this short story project. Like, the requirements for, like, oh, a 5-page short story, do whatever, pick a prompt. And I wrote a 35-page something for this thing. And I didn't imagine at the time that the teacher appreciated that very much, since mine was 9 times the work to read than everyone else's. But she left this super long note on the back of it, like, this is really high quality. If anyone's going to be a writer in this class, it's you. You need to make a
That's awesome.
and I'm like, "Thank you." It's like, that's
You
really
know,
nice to say.
you know what? Teachers, man. I'm biased because my wife's a teacher, but my middle school English teacher, Taskinady, Scott Lambert, my drama teacher, his wife Kate Lambert, like those. I'm in my 40s now. Those people really changed my life. That is so cool. I love to hear that. So yeah, if you're a teacher or librarian, there's a reason why people in book publishing love you so much. It's not just because you
Yeah,
support what we
to
do.
really make an effort, really can make a change in helping nurture creative writers early on.
Yeah, that is a really cool story. Well, I hope we can get that teacher a copy of this book. If you haven't yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, kind of going back to one of the stories, and it's something I've asked you before in one of our talks when we were talking at a sales conference, but you kind of know, because I guess when you knew how the book was going to end, did you know, and you knew how the book was going to begin, did you know how you wanted to sort of, I don't want to give anything away, but plan the twist throughout, or was that something that you as a writer kind of figure out as you're writing? So are you more of an improviser or more of a planner, I guess is what I'm asking.
That's also a really interesting question, because as much as I planned at the ending, and you having read it, all of those twists that you're thinking in your head, I had the general idea that these were the beats I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to accomplish them. Like, the
Yeah.
characters that I used to accomplish those twists were not planned at all. I just knew that these were the
Right.
general steps along the way to get Joel to this point for the end of the story. As far as the beginning of the book, I would say, like, my Achilles heel as a writer is figuring out where to start anything.
Interesting.
I started that book like 6, 7 times. I wrote so many different chapter ones of that book, and I was just like, this is not the place to start this book. I had such a hard time figuring out where to start it and how to start it, and like which elements to try to show, like, like how to fit everything important into the pre-madness before getting into
Yeah.
it. And that was one of the hardest parts of the book to write for me, was the very beginning of it, just because it was such a balancing act of trying to figure out how to fit all of the relevant information in there without being boring. And then on that note, just since you just mentioned those twists and turns and the ideas along the way, there's a version of this book that exists somewhere that only my brother has read, and my mom, where a lot of those twists and turns along the way were so completely differently the main chunk of the book and the characters and the throughout that you meet throughout the middle of the book and like sort of the entire structure of the survivors and the people in it in the middle of the book, how it is currently, was a wildly different book. It's so hard to describe how different it was without spoiling the current version, but
Okay.
it just goes to show how much ideas can change. Because I got to like chapter 3 or chapter 4 until it was time to start introducing these ideas and these characters, and I was like, this is really stupid. I need to change this. I need to change this to something better right now, and I'm very happy that I made those changes because it turned out a lot better than my original interpretation.
That's cool. Well, this is early. Was the convenience store into the first draft, or is that something that you put in later? The gas station convenience store.
The gas station was not in the first chapter originally.
Interesting.
So it ended up in the second chapter, just because I felt like for the first chapter, again, it was such a hard balance. Like even thinking about chapter 1 right now, I almost wish that I had done a couple of things differently as far as pacing. But I felt like ending chapter 1 with Joel's first night in the city felt like a very natural place to end it.
Yeah.
Then you raise the stakes with the gas station and Jeremy the next night, and then by chapter 3, you're really getting into the meat of it, and then you just start introducing other survivors and other elements that I was talking about before. There was one version of chapter 1 that I had wrote where chapter 1 ended basically where I started the current version of chapter 1. Where like there was an entire 2 days before where
interesting.
The current book where you're spending a little bit more time with these characters and spending a little bit more time figuring out their routines so that you can contrast it to whenever everything goes downhill. But I was like, for it being a relatively short book, all things considered, it's like, do people really want to spend 10, 15,000 words getting to know the lives of these people? So it's just part of the.
I love that it just starts right away, and that that first night is so terrifying. There's something about being in a place with all these supplies but having no use for any of them that is just horrifying, and it's definitely, especially in the wake of the pandemic and everything that we've gone through, supplies and things like that being so top of mind. It's definitely there's something very unnerving about it. So that's very interesting to hear. Well, I mean, we're like about to open it up to questions, but before, I wanted to see, is there anything else you want to tell the readers? Other than obviously, if you want to hear more about Sirens, you want to hear the next part that Braden has in his mind, buy Sirens. Check it out in your library. Buy it.
Absolutely. I mean, not to hype up my own ideas, but like it's been 3 years since I've been wrote this book.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of it in the state that it's in right now. But I've also had 3 years to work on ideas for future ones. So I'm just saying, like, if you want to see what's going on up here for the future of this, then by all means,
I do.
Show support.
Cool. And I like staying busy, so anything that gives me more stuff to work on. I definitely feel like I have the best job in the world, so I'm very excited. So I think that we open up questions in the chat. Obviously I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that we can open up questions to the chat. Anybody wants to ask? We have a Q&A here. Okay. Here we go. Oh, look, that is so cool. I highlighted it with my mouse and it popped up on the screen. Without spoilers, of all the challenges that Joel faced in Sirens, how did you decide what he faced?
That is a very interesting question. Half of it, I would say about half of it was in the moment I realized that there was an idea for a cool scene and I added it. And the other half were twists that I knew that I wanted to happen.
Right.
And that, so for example, like if I had a map of this book in my mind where it's like, okay, I know that Joel is going from A to B to C to D, doing whatever, and things are happening and challenges are presented to him. Since I didn't structure the novel between those points anyway, if I was between points B and point C and I was like, wait a minute, there's actually a really cool idea for a scene or a challenge here too, that I would just add it in the moment and see if it worked. And if it did work, I left it in.
Very cool. Well, we kind of touched on this a little bit. And I think that I don't think I'm the one who puts the question on the screen. I like literally hovered my mouse over it and it came up. I'm like, oh, that must be me. No. The next questions we have here are there any supporting characters that changed from the initial draft to the final release? I think you kind of touched on that a little bit, but yeah, I mean, who else?
That's an extremely hard question to answer without spoiling a couple of them. I can say very confidently that a couple of the characters did not change at all, but I know that's not that's not very helpful in answering the question. But as far as the supporting characters go, there's very limited amount of actual supporting characters that are like recurring. Because I mean, if you've read it, like you have Emily, you have Matthias, you have Jay who shows up, you have Kayla. There are characters that show up, but like other than a small handful, there's not really a lot of recurring characters. And of those, a couple of them changed dramatically as I was writing it. And I had to like almost restructure like entire chapters of dialogue around the fact that I'm changing these characters in the moment. But then other ones like Emily were so foundational to the story of the book and sort of being Joel's companion along the way and sort of being in cahoots with him and trying to figure everything out. Like Emily didn't change from start to finish. Other ones changed a lot.
Yeah. And this one is really fun. I like avoiding spoilers as best you can.
Yeah.
Do you have a particular scene/scenes that were your favorite or most fun to write?
Even harder to answer without spoilers.
Yeah, I know.
I think the most obvious answer is that the final scene that I had in mind from the very beginning was the most satisfying to write, because at that point it was, months of thinking about it and tens of thousands and tens of thousands of words of writing leading up to this moment of writing the final scene. So there's a lot of emotional validation in being able to finally write that scene within context. But honestly, the best I can answer this without spoiling it is that other than those sort of cathartic scenes that I was like really planning towards, I really enjoyed writing the action scenes actually. Like you had mentioned, the gas station and Jeremy. I feel like that's just stuck out for a lot of people because it's like just a really solid action piece, kind of out of nowhere, given that chapter 1 is a little bit slower. So I really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites to read, as I've mentioned on here as well. Yeah, and it's funny, how many drafts do you think you did, like overall? Because so people don't know, like you and I had our back and forth. I was able to acquire it, and then you did a few kind of touch-ups as we proofread and copy edited, but it'd probably been through, 5-6 drafts before it came to me? Or
At least. It's a little bit hard to put a number on it because I didn't do, this is a bad habit, and if there are any writers who are like watching this, like, kind of some writing advice, don't do what I did, and that's that I retroactively edited every chapter along the way before I even wrote the next thing. So it's sort of like I didn't have multiple versions of the manuscript. I had 15 versions of chapter 1 and 12 versions of chapter 2 and 10 versions of chapter 3. And then over time, all but consolidated into one manuscript. And then retrospectively, I ended up having 4 or 5 variations of the story with slight, scene additions, character changes, dialogue changes, or in the case from the very first draft to the very last draft, completely different 90% of the book.
Interesting. That's so funny. Well, here's a question that I don't know no answer to this. Name Jeremy. Any of the characters' name chosen with a purpose? Apparently, Jeremy is also a name that's used in Five Nights.
That's an interesting question, and no, character names are chosen with a purpose, not for that purpose.
Yes.
Character names
not for that purpose.
Yeah, not for that purpose. Some of the character names are chosen because they were kind of working names for characters that they reminded me of. Like, for example, the story behind the character Joel being called Joel is that in my original interpretation of the adult version of the book, my mental stand-in for him as a character was Joel from The Last of Us, father who's trying, surrogate daughter. So I called him Joel to start with because in that original interpretation, that's who I thought of him as. And then the name just stuck forever. And then other ones like Matthias, I chose because they have, the name itself has connotations that are relevant to the plot. Which, look up what Matthias means.
Yes.
That's a hint.
We won't give that one away, but That name is very. There's a very specific reason behind that name. I'll say that. When we talk about The Last of Us, this question is right on. So, as someone who enjoys video games, do you envision the story play out like one when playing a video game?
That's also a very interesting question. I would say maybe it gets complicated whenever we have multiple perspectives trying to talk about how a video game would play out, because like you could imagine if you're just following Joel the entire time, there is a very linear sort of nature to his story, and that, which I mean, it being supposed to be a psychological thriller and each chapter sort of ending on a hook, each chapter leads into the next chapter almost like you're playing a game, and there's a set piece leading into a set piece leading into a set piece.
Yeah.
But that a wrench does get thrown into that a little bit whenever you have multi POVs, whenever you have epigraphs, but yeah.
Maybe that's how you subconsciously also got into my head with the book. As I love video games and play video games, I love the way video games tell stories. It's interesting to think about that. Very cool question. All right. Well, what was your favorite thing to research while writing Sirens?
Favorite thing to research? I actually don't know that I did a whole lot of research per se, because I very, very intentionally did not name a particular city. I did not name anything. Like I wanted this to be like the exact details of the location or the surrounding world to me mattered nothing for the story. The story is Joel, the story is the people he immediately knows, and it's his family. So I very intentionally avoided drawing any parallels to any real life place. So the only research that I really did was into stuff like character name meanings. I don't know. That's really it. There wasn't a lot of research that had to be done. It was just all kind of up there.
Yeah, and it feels like a lot of this draws from just personal, almost, I wouldn't say personal experience, but just the way that personally we react to the world around us a little bit. We've got another one here about, you mentioned Siren Head, got this reader thinking. Were there any other internet creepypastas or things like that had some influence on any elements of the book? Well, I don't know.
That is a very interesting question. And I mean, I had already mentioned Local 58, obviously. Local 58 and Siren Head are the two sort of internet creepypastas or sort of niche stories that really had influences on elements of the book. Because like a lot of the other creepypastas that are popular on the internet, just, I mean, if you think about like, the Back Rooms or Slender Man or something, those are very like thematically they're extremely different. In terms of purpose, they're extremely different. It's just Siren Head and Local 58 that really had a direct influence, just because I loved the psychological elements of them so much.
Cool. As a kid, did you ever say, like, dare your friends to say Bloody Mary 3 times in the mirror or anything like that as the precursor?
The closest we ever got to doing that was, I actually have a very distinct memory one time of, it was like a summer camp, and we were all staying up really late, and we were daring each other to tell each other internet creepypastas and see who could tell the creepypasta. And so like we were all sitting there scaring each other by telling each other about Jeff the Killer on the internet and all this kind of nonsense.
Oh man, I love that. Well, I think we're like just about to the end of time. I don't know if anybody has any will you try your hand at fantasy in the future?
Interesting question with an even interestinger answer. I have tried my hand at fantasy in the past 3 years. Project has come to a bit of a halt, but I got 60,000 words into a fantasy novel.
Wow.
And it was I loved thinking about it a lot more than I did writing it, just because like I love reading fantasy, I love watching fantasy, I love thinking about fantasy, but especially going from a story like Sirens, which is so narrow in focus in terms of characters and stories and places, and expanding to a multi-POV, multi-nation, continental story, it was daunting for me. So I got to like chapter 8 or 9, and I'm just like, I cannot manage this. I need to just come back to this in 5 years, and I'm a better author.
There's something to taking a break when a project gets overwhelming. But I'm interested to hear more about your fantasy whenever you decide to take that project back up.
For sure.
What would you say to anyone looking to write stories of their own?
this is going to sound like a really weird piece of advice, but and it's not hardly even advice, but writing is hard. If you want to write a stories and you're demotivated by like, oh, it's really hard to come up with an idea, it's really hard to start a story, I can't motivate myself to write. Writing is hard. And it's hard for everybody. It doesn't matter how much you practice writing, it doesn't matter how good of an idea you have or how good of a writer you is. Writing is hard. Write though. You have to write. If you want to write, you have to write no matter how hard it is. And then at the end of the day, you'll have something on the page. That's really the best I can do because quite frankly, I don't even think I'm qualified to give advice about writing, having been like, not only is this my debut novel, this is my first piece of creative writing outside of like high school, It's like I'm as inexperienced as writing as any of the rest of you were at the time of writing it.
I can tell you that's great advice. Just write, even if it ends up bad, quote unquote. There's anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. Just write, okay, So, are you playing any video games right now? What are you playing right now? Because I know the answer. I know you are. I am too.
I am a huge World of Warcraft guy. In fact, there might be some of you I know in World of Warcraft might be watching this, but World of Warcraft is
very cool.
the thing that I've been playing since I was like 4 years old. Like my dad sat me down. It's like, I want you to play this game with me. And I started playing World of Warcraft with him, and the rest is history.
That's so cool. Yeah. World of Warcraft is something. It's amazing what that franchise is. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, we were even talking about the fact that like that franchise had so much influence on me. Like I've read all of the novels, like by Christie Golden. I've read, gone to the convention.
Yeah,
that's just the thing of choice for me. I don't know what to tell you.
That is the power of licensing. I'll plug what we do at Scholastic too. Licensing and being able to tell stories in other worlds can be really powerful.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think we're basically out of time. Braden, this has been really fun.
Absolutely.
Really fun. Yeah, and I hope that you all enjoyed it too. We'll. Hey.
Hi.
We're bringing you back. Hey.
Yeah, I don't want you to have to say goodbye all on your own.
Thank you.
But I do want to thank both of you for such an engaging conversation. It really was delightful learning about the writing process, the fact that you started with the last 2 pages and then wrote a book from there, and also you wrote a book for adults and then made it YA. It's pretty there's so many things that you wouldn't realize without having heard this discussion. So thank you so much for taking the time this evening to talk to us, and we've had a nice chunk of viewers this whole time who have been very interested in what's going on. So just, again, thank you so much for being here and taking that time with us. I want to thank all of our viewers who came to watch it and ask questions and things like that. I also want to point out, if you listen to all this and haven't purchased Sirens yet, what are you doing? Click that link. They're pointing at it. But come on. How can you not want to? After all of that, this sounds incredible, does it not? So, to all the viewers, have a great rest of your night. And another, online round of applause. Thank you, Braden. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, everyone else. Have a great evening.
Thank you all so much.
Good again.